Thank you. Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you. So we're going to talk about starting a company in Bitcoin and banking a company in Switzerland and also issuing security tokens all the legal way. And it's based on our own experience of NIM and also helping other companies in general. So there will be lots of tips and tricks there. Yeah, so I just propose you that we start. Quickly, we
Yeah,
have.
so I'm the CEO. I did my PhD in computer science or informatics, as they call it, in Edinburgh, in the UK. Worked in France at MIT, leading research projects on privacy and mass surveillance. And I left the USA to found NIM Technologies, which is a society anonyme, hilariously enough, in Switzerland. So we'll discuss how we set up the company in Switzerland. So just
Yeah.
wondering, how many people here have a company in Switzerland already? Okay, if so, you may know this. So you
Right.
may not learn so much. How many people want a company in Switzerland? Okay, and this will be
Uh,
more useful for you. How many people want to issue a token, like a security token in Switzerland? Okay, so we
yeah.
will go through this process. Okay, so it will be useful for you.
Yes. Perfect. So me, I'm Alexis Roussel. I'm the COO. So partner in crime was Harry, and I created first a broker called Bitty, and a lot of the experience also comes from there. It's a Bitcoin broker since 2013, and got the first license, and I helped several fundraising, several public sale and ICOs. And well, on the side, I also work on digital rights, and this is where the theme of privacy meets crypto finance. And so the what we built here, what we're going to present is a mixture of all our experience and all what we designed together in setting up NIM and making sure that NIM was solid legally, primarily in Switzerland, but also in outside of Switzerland. So the first thing that you would do in Switzerland, and it's actually also possible in other countries. I know it's possible in France, and I learned yesterday it was also possible in Italy, is that you can incorporate your company in Bitcoin or in crypto in general, but in Bitcoin is specific. So before even incorporating, you have to first choose your type of organization. Um, the type of organization will depend on your project. So I put here the type of organization specifically if you want to make a token. A lot of people tell you, oh, you have to make a foundation or you have to make such type of a specific type of organization. But in reality, the form of your organization doesn't matter if you issue a token. So when you think about what type of organization you want to choose, you really have to think about what is the dynamic of the governance model you have with the founders, right? What you want to do. You want to build software and make money, you make a SA. You want to have something which is more towards public good, you can do a foundation or an association. But the fact that just the mere fact that you want to issue a token doesn't mean that you have to be a foundation. We chose, in our case, to be a corporation, and while issue a token, and you can think of it as that the company gets a mandate from the investors to actually build a network which will be owned by the community afterwards. You want to add
Yeah,
something?
maybe go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So I think you just,
Yeah.
so I mean, so I was the one in charge of this decision. So this is Jonathan Gevers for people that don't know. So the situation with Tezos. So what often happens is that people form their organization based on what other organizations have done. So for example, you see a lot of people wanting to form a foundation. Now foundations can but do not automatically get a certain tax exemption status. They have to be publicly audited and they have to have directors. Now, the why I think foundations are generally a poor organization form for any kind of crypto project is because effectively it's very hard to fire or remove a foundation director. So you can have a very wide remit for for the public good. The Swiss state, if you want this tax exemption, has to accept this remit, and there's some other requirements. But in general, the problem is that there is not a way to get rid of a board member unless you write some rules which are customized and you have those approved, but you're very unlikely to know those in advance. So often in Switzerland, you'll have people, particularly, I would say, relatively scammy lawyers, want to put themselves on your foundation board or your company board. In general, I would always say no to that, right? Particularly with foundations, because once the lawyer's on the board, you can't get them out. It's like a parasite that will never leave your organization. And that we have a lot of proof is very, we'll do all sorts of low-level grift. So you don't want that in general. So if you only want a foundation, if you're actually primarily aiming to be nonprofit tax-exempt activities, you already have a strong board, and you already have a strong Swiss presence, including Swiss directors who are committed to the foundation's project, and you believe you will trust those people for basically eternity. Mutual associations are a little bit more low budget. Again, you have to have one resident Swiss director, 2 directors at least, and they were originally made to be like kind of bodies. I have like a league of people that like to go bowling, so we'd form together to go bowling or to support gardening. And so the nice mutual associations, they're not for profit. They don't have the tax exempt status. It's very hard to get. You typically want to be a foundation for that. But they're a bit lightweight, easier set up. The only possible advantage you often see from mutual associations that there's not a registry of mutual associations, but they can still obtain banking relations. So you need banking. You don't want to be a for-profit. You need the banking quickly. You could be a mutual association, particularly if it's like a industry alliance, a group of people, maybe a standards body or a open source coding project. That might fit easier. I also think mutual associations don't have the starting capital cost so they're often cheaper to form. But again, they have a lot of disadvantages because they don't come with a clear structure. You have to kind of invent the structure. Your lawyer maybe will cut and paste one for you together, but you have to think about this a bit. So we chose a corporation, AG in German, Society Anonyme in Swiss, insofar as that corporations, if you plan to make money, it's useful, it's a for-profit structure, but even if you don't plan to make money, it's a useful structure insofar as that Switzerland has well-defined corporate law. So you just inherit this kind of well-thought-through corporate law process that is more lightweight than the United States or in other jurisdictions, but generally pretty sensible. So this means that, for example, we're the directors of NIM, but we don't have all the shares. So if I went crazy, like John and Gever, I want to spend all my money setting up, a project in like the Tunisian dinar or something, and people say, that's not really, we thought you were a privacy project, they could fire me. Right? So it's quite useful because you often do find, particularly in cryptocurrency, because sometimes, not right now, but historically, there's been lots of money involved, that people do go crazy pretty quickly sometimes, even people that people thought were relatively sane. So you have kind of a clear board, clear share-based voting to elect the board, clear rules of governance, and you kind of inherit that all by default. So I do think that you do need the 100K starting capital, but you can do that in Bitcoin, so it's not as brutal. If you have some Bitcoin, it's not as brutal as people think.
We'll come to that close. A small insight of how we choose the shareholders. So depending if you want to issue a token at one point, or if you want to stay purely as a company who is making money without issuing a token, basically you choose. You have to decide where you're going to allow your investor to chip in. So either you sell equity, right? You give equity, or you give tokens, and it's bad to allow people to mix both. So we decided from the start that we're going to issue a token, have investors going into the token, giving value to the token, and so the equity is only amongst the founders, individuals who are working in a company, and we have this agreement that if you leave the company, basically you give back your shares, right? So that separates, and some companies sometimes mixes. Investor comes, they want tokens and equity. We think it's a bad idea because it creates imbalances between the people investing in your project.
Yeah, so you if you were going to do a route where you want a tokenized equity, it's kind of nice insofar as that there's just one fundamental asset class your company is dealing with. If you believe you will have two asset classes, maybe you're tokenizing gold or you are a utility token or whatnot, and you also have equity, the danger is that if the value accumulates to one asset class versus another, the owners of the value asset class, which the value did not accumulate to, could potentially threaten some legal action against you. So let's say I bought equity, but then you issue a token, the token value goes up, the equity remains flat, then the owners of the equity could have some anger and could even possibly start legal proceedings. I think that's happened once or twice. I don't think in Switzerland against the other class of asset holder. So in general, it's kind of good to keep the asset classes simplified and segregated. I also would be very wary. Investors tend to be very greedy, so they often tend to put, which is, I mean, it's their job, right? To try to get very large remits about additional future asset classes, and so you basically, like when you're doing a deal, you should really specify. You shouldn't be murky about what the investor's getting. Like, are they getting equity? Yes. And you see these kind of crazy agreements being thrown around, particularly by U.S.-based investors, which I recommend excluding. We can do another section on that. But you generally do not want U.S.-based investors unless you actually have to have them, because there are a lot of rules there. We did what's called a strict Reg S, so we excluded U.S., and I'd recommend, in general, people do that if they can get away with it, because when you're also starting a new organization, it's very good to have clear jurisdictional bounds. So your jurisdictions are kind of all over the place. The way that, I mean, Switzerland is very Swiss, so Switzerland does not typically care particularly much, I mean, it could happen, about things that happen outside of Switzerland. However, there are other jurisdictions, I would say the United States is a good example of, where what you saw happen a lot is people would set up all these like weird, I mean, you can look at FTX, right? Several of these like weird shadow organizations. Like, I have something in the Cayman, I got something in BVI, and the BVI thing disappears, and a foundation in Switzerland. Ethereum actually would be a good example of this, right? So you have this consensus thing, which is Swiss, then moves to the US, and you have this foundation that then somehow moves to Singapore, but somehow is also still in Zug. The US government in general will say, we don't care about your form of organization. So they don't care if you're a company or not. This is all immaterial. They care about the actors behind it and who's accumulating value, and they call it punch through. So they're going to punch through. So like you can be Sam Bankman-Fried and set up all these crazy things. We highly recommend not doing that. And then it doesn't really matter because you do something illegal, they're going to go through all these things, even if like, oh, it's like some other guy in charge of it. So we actually recommend, this is what we did at NIM, is we recommend setting up a minimize number of entities. Ideally, one entity is the best way, and have a clear jurisdictional plan for operating. So I'm the one that chose Switzerland. The reason we chose Switzerland was clear rules and clear jurisdictional capabilities. There is a myth that there are jurisdictions without rules. It is true there are jurisdictions with lax rules. So British Virgin Islands, I think his like prime minister just got arrested for coke dealing or something. I mean, there are jurisdictions that have very light rules, and often say, oh, we have no tax, blah, blah, blah. We don't care where you live. But that's actually very problematic, because if you do something in a jurisdiction without clear rules, other jurisdictions can therefore say our rules apply. So particularly the United States has a kind of imperialist jurisdiction perspective where they will say, hey, you may think you're being very smart by setting up in BVI or the Bahamas or, I don't know, some random island somewhere. And it may look superficially smart because, oh, you have a 0% tax rate and whatever. But then it doesn't matter because they will say, well, if there's no rules around securities, for example, in your jurisdiction, then our rules by default apply. So there's no like get out of jail free card just because you're in a weird jurisdiction. And I think one of the reasons we recommend Switzerland as a jurisdiction, I mean, Switzerland is not perfect. It has some issues, but it does at least have a relatively clear set of rules which are crypto friendly, and Switzerland does not do the thing a lot of other jurisdictions do. Typically when Switzerland creates rules, takes them a few, if they wanted to update them, in the Bahamas, it would update overnight, right? And Switzerland's going to take a few years. There actually is a legal process here to update rules. Second, Switzerland tends to grandfather stuff in. I don't know if that's written down per se, but like if I got approved, let's say I get a license one day, and I do some activity. Maybe in the future, Switzerland will say, hey, you need a new license. That's fine, you get a new license. But they're not going to then go back and say the activity you did under the prior regime is illegal or takes a fine or something. That's very dangerous. You do have, the United States, for example, will do that. So the United States will say, you have done something. I did something in 2019, which is now illegal in 2021. For like people just saw the new FinCEN guidance. It doesn't matter when the guidance comes out. They can generally back prosecute. That's pretty dangerous. And that's why one reason I would heavily recommend not forming a company in the USA, well, besides the current dysfunctional government, is also because it's not clear who's like making the rules sometimes. So you need a clear set of rules. Those rules need to be changed with a clear process, and you should not be able to prosecute present activity based on future rules, which are unknown at the time of the activity. It sounds common sense, but you'd be surprised. Like it's, yeah.
So once you choose your type of organization, you have to set up the initial money. Either it's capital for a corporation, either it's money for the foundation, either it's association. You don't need to put money, but you still need to put some resources together. So what in Switzerland we were able to do, which actually is possible in other countries, but is picking up specifically in Switzerland, is having BTC as an in-kind contribution to create the company, right? So normally, traditionally, what you would do, the process of creating company is you decide as a founders to create a company. You would have to gather money, Swiss francs, to form the capital. And you have to put this money into a bank account. So you have the process of like opening up a bank account, and then once the bank account is open, you go to the notary, and the bank will give a paper saying indeed there is 100,000 Swiss franc on the bank. The thing is that process is that the banks is highly dependent on compliance processes, which are much more what is requested than just to organize a company. And so now we find out that it takes weeks usually to vet all the shareholders when you create a new company. So except if you're already in the system, it's already your bank, it might be very fast. But if you're like foreign investors and you want to create this company, it might take weeks. So for a KYC process, which is not actually needed for the company, it's for the registration at the notary itself. So we found out that putting capital in kind actually makes the speed, like you earn at least 1 to 2 weeks of speed, and you can set up a company in, like, let's say, a week and actually have it published within the business registry. So for some cases, like US person, it actually can help, because nowhere in the Swiss law it says that a US person cannot create a company in Switzerland, but the banks will be very difficult with US person. And so if you want to set up and Swiss company have been usually trying to push down the number of like a US person in the board because of that reason. But now we have a way to go around it. So usually what happens if you take a BTC, they will say, well, you need a bit of extra because BTC is volatile, so you need some 30% extra. Instead of going through a bank, you would have to go through an accountant that will basically say that indeed you have the money, indeed the funds are being put there. So the KYC is minimal, is based on the individual. Are you a real person? You have your ID, yes, and you're really in Switzerland, cool. It's not a AML check like the bank would do. So the most difficult part today is actually to find the accountant. It's getting more and more common, and the accountant also needs to provide a good service. So traditional accountant who doesn't know about crypto, they will just go along with a screenshot of your wallet, which is not really cool. I think it's actually even not. It's unsafe, but it's also disrespectful of the work that you're doing. So a serious accountant, and we train some of them, actually ask you to sign a message with the private keys of the wallet, and the best ones they can actually manage multi-sig. So it's picking up. and that's really good. So you see there on the numbers, this is a study that I made last year, looking at how many companies were created in Switzerland with a contribution in kind in crypto. So you can see that about 30 companies in 2019. It started actually in 2017, the initial companies, and then you see there's a boom in 2021 and 2022. Mostly are almost every canton has had companies created in kind. Most of the company are in Zug. Second is Zurich, and third, a bit further, is Neuchâtel comes, but really Zug, it means that the fiduciaries in Zug have taken this as a tool because it really goes faster. What we see also in this number is that actually most of them now, if you drill down by type of currency, it's USDT, which is the leading part. It shows it's related to the fact that a lot of entrepreneurs now have USDT in their pockets. The day they want to create a company, they use what they have. And because of the bear market of Bitcoin, people were not using their Bitcoin, but rather using their USDT, and you don't need to put the 30%. So in the case of NIM, the initial payment was done also in Bitcoin, and also when we create our only subsidiary in France, we created this with a contribution kind in Bitcoin, and we started in France without a bank account. So it was a bit. Some people have. Yeah. Sorry, you have a question?
Have you also come across a case where not the initial incorporation was done by payments in kind, but also capital raises?
Yeah, sure, you can do that. Yeah, the same. It's the same rule. This doesn't change anything. Yes.
And now it comes.
Huh?
What if the contribution in kind is not in BTC on mainnet, but in the Lightning Network?
It would be the same.
I don't think they care about the technical
The
details.
network layer doesn't matter. It's a fantasy of our community that the layer matters.
The difference is that I don't want to have the channels closed, so I cannot tell an accountant that we will deposit somewhere the BTC. He needs to then check the node and see that.
No. So you're mixing technicalities with who has the control of the money. You just have to show the accountant that now this money is owned by the company. That's it.
Okay.
Is it in a Lightning channel? He doesn't care, and the notary doesn't care, and the business registry doesn't care. In the books of the company, now there's some bitcoins. That's it, right?
Okay.
And don't mix technicalities with with here. It's all right. So quickly, a few words about NIM. The company.
I can do this real quick. So I'll just go. So just what NIM is, we're building a mixed net. I gave a talk with Ricardo Masuti from Bitfinex last year. So that talk describes it all, but we'll just give a very brief thing. So we have a mixed net. They've been around for a while, invented by David Chaum. They basically prevent traffic analysis by an adversary, including the NSA. They can view the whole network. We have a reputation token, which you put on the mixed nodes. These predate Bitcoin for those who are interested in this use case, and they help make the whole thing decentralized. And we also built an anonymous credential system, which is decentralized and a version of Chaumian credentials. And effectively, it works like Tor. You hop through 3 hops. You have covered traffic. The packets. So you don't have packets, you have fake packets that are sent into the network. The packets reorder, so forth and so on, to make things anonymous, so you can't track which packet's going through the network. And if you want more people to join network, you just add more nodes and it scales horizontally. So it's useful on that level. So you can sort of see, if you imagine that packets are like different sizes, that's the timing and volume information. You can see with a VPN, the VPN knows exactly what you're doing. VPNs are kind of dumb on some level because they just move the center of trust to someone else's computer. If you don't trust that person or computer, it's a very unwise decision. They know what you're doing exactly, and they can maintain complete records on you unless you trust them not to. Tor is better. I use Tor a lot. I recommend people use Tor because it has 3 hops, so there's not a centralized center of trust in the middle of the whole network. However, the directory authority, which Tor uses to maintain those list of nodes, is centralized. It's 7 servers ran by, or 11 ran by the Friends of the Tor Foundation. NIM kind of decentralizes the collection of nodes, and most importantly, it uses Sphinx packet format like Lightning, so all the nodes are the same size. Sorry, the packets are the same size. And the nodes mix the packets up. That's like shuffling a deck of cards. The packets don't come in, first out. You can see that scrambles like the fingerprint at the timing and volume information. So that's all. So we had this technical innovation, and we wanted to commercialize it. I'll keep going next.
Yeah.
And so we were a research project. So we came around about our story about how we came to Switzerland is we came about via what's called panoramics. So after the Snowden revelations in 2013, the EU said, oh, it's kind of bad. The US is spying on Merkel and everyone. We should do something about this. So they threw up like $4 or $5 million of research funding. I was part of the consortium, which is a consortium of universities and a few private companies that called Panoramics that basically we're going to build a mixnet to create a European alternative to Tor that's resistant to mass surveillance. So Tor is not resistant to mass surveillance. People get very confused on this. So there's a kind of adversary which can watch the whole network like God, and Tor does not deal with that adversary because it's just, it's not Tor's problem really, right? So Tor is not trying to defend you against the US government. They're trying to defend human rights activists or agents in Iran from their local government. So it's a very different use case, at least when it started. You can read the Tor paper when it goes through it. So we said, okay, we have this cool mixnet, but of course, like all research projects, the money runs out. It's like a finite lifespan. So we said, let's do a startup. So the European Commission approved that we do a startup, and we started looking at jurisdictions. We chose Switzerland. The European Commission was not so happy with it, but we had good arguments saying, well, it's not really Europe, but it's close enough, and that at the time Europe had no clear cryptocurrency regulations. So we said, "Come on, what do you expect us to do?" So they said, "Okay, it's okay." So we incorporated Neuchâtel with Bitcoin, primarily because we could incorporate with Bitcoin in Neuchâtel. We had lawyers that accepted Bitcoin. We used Liax as a firm. If you're in Neuchâtel, I'd recommend them. Outside, you would use a different firm. I would be very wary of a firm that does too many companies. Right, so there are these like cookie cutter firms that do a lot of companies. The danger if something goes wrong is that firm won't help you. And again, one side, or that they're scammy. There are a lot of scammy cryptocurrency firms out there. And the general way you can detect those firms, just to be very clear, is that they offer to put themselves on the board. And that's very dangerous because you can never get rid of them. So then you're kind of like stuck with this lawyer forever who will then do whatever he wants. So if your lawyer is not on the board, you want to move cantons, you want to get a new lawyer, you at least have the freedom of doing this. You're not like permanently attached to a particular legal firm. We've had no problems with Liax, but it's good. There's a lot of trust in the initial firm. The second thing you should do is you should get trademarks and word marks. So companies often screw this up. So word marks and trademarks and other forms of IP, which would include software patents, you may not like them, but the fact of the matter is they are necessary, particularly word marks and trademarks, because otherwise it's very easy to get in legal trouble. So if you say, like we said, we're NIM, we filed those word marks and trademarks first in Switzerland, then the EU, and then the US. And the reason is we don't want a larger company coming after us saying we're NIM and then taking us to court for using their word mark or trademark. So it's probably good to file those things defensively. It's not so expensive. You can search for them yourselves, but you would probably need a law firm to help you with the paperwork. You can also file it yourself. It's not so bad. There are countries now, China is, a lot of the copycat scams you'll see will come out, to be very frank, will come out of Asia, particularly China. Used to be that China had a very loose regime on this stuff, as in copyright didn't exist in China, which is fine. It still doesn't. I don't like copyright, so I'm kind of okay with that in theory. The problem is you don't want, again, someone like searches the name of your company, you don't want them to be confused and be redirected to a scam that says send Bitcoin to this address and they take all your Bitcoin. The people, you'd be shocked about how much this happens. And China is now trying to get people to respect their intellectual property. We'll see how that turns out. But I would at least recommend Switzerland, EU, and USA because they have the strongest regulations. It should be noted that, again, if you're a mutual association, you're not registered in the Chamber of Commerce. But if you're a company, you're a private company, there's a public registry of commerce. Now, many people think this is bad. So some people will say, I want a mutual association because whatever I'm doing is so dodgy, it should be hidden. If it's so dodgy, it should be hidden, you might not want to have like a formal body, right? You should probably just be some people who are anonymous. But if you do want a formal body, it's probably good to be public, and that public registry is updated whenever the board changes or share capital changes or you get an auditor, so forth and so on. So I'll give you a quick example of one. This is from the Neuchâtel Register de Commerce. Next slide. So this is what we look like, and it's kind of nice because whenever you're doing business, people often want to know the entity that they're doing business with. So, and some jurisdictions do not have clear registries. You will get them eventually everywhere. I mean, because of the push to understand who is the UBO or ultimate beneficiary owner rules are now being more and more harshly put into place. But, it's kind of useful because you say, here's my organization, this is what our purpose is, this is what our shares are, these are the board owners. It's very useful in terms of due diligence. So when we deal with another company, say some guy shows up with a telegram, he's like, send me some Bitcoin, I represent, I don't know, Bitfinex. There's a lot of scammers that pretend to represent Bitfinex. So how do you know they really represent Bitfinex? There's various heuristics you can use, but, you can ask Bitfinex. You can have a trusted contact. However, ultimately that root of trust boils down to the registry. There's some entity somewhere which is registered, there's a board, and in theory you can be able to contact that entity via, it's very old fashioned, but via their mailing address. So we do recommend that companies register. When you register, you literally walk over with your documents. You have to do this every time there's a change to the local registry of commerce, and you update your registry data, and that's fine. And it's very old-fashioned. They have like a notebook. They'll put in a notebook, and then there's a website that updates. And this information is all public. There are a lot of scams. So people should be careful. If you just kind of Google registries on the internet, there'll be like people that'll try to charge you for registering. You do have to pay the actual local registry. I forget how much, but there's a little charge. But be careful of websites. Like, do things with the registry in your canton in person. Also beware, you will get, if you register trademarks or a new company, sometimes there's whole scammy businesses that will try to get you to send them money. They'll send you fake letters saying, hey, you need to register with us. Or
letters that look like invoices.
Yeah, they'll make something that looks like an invoice from the European, European Patent Office or Trademark Office. And they'll send you a letter, and then you got to look and you're like, oh, what? This letter's from Prague or something. It's not. It's not actually from the European Patent Office. Oh, it's not from Switzerland. You really need to be careful because they will send you these very real-looking invoices because this information is public. So what they do is they get this information, they try to figure out who you are, and then they get your mailing address, and then they send it over. Right? You also see that the auditors, this is a little note, we recommend being publicly audited. So a lot of crypto companies have a bad reputation. So one way to avoid this bad reputation, well, first, don't be very scammy. Second, just get audited. It is expensive, but it's a good process for business. If you are looking for investment, being audited typically helps because it increases the comfort level of investors and should increase. Most consumers are not so educated, but it should increase the comfort in your company being a real company because you have an independent audit firm. Foundations also have to have an independent audit form.
All right, now we get to a very interesting point because right now we set up a company that has it's done with crypto, so we don't have a bank account, right? And depending what it gives you the liberty to go and look for a bank if you need it, right? So there is a really good case to make if you're a software company, a consulting company, a law firm, that actually you might not need a bank account at all, right? But in some cases, you want to have a bank account for your strategy. And so it is possible now to live without a bank account. I have one company like this. There is a broker, Peach, which is without a bank account because it suits their business model, right? But in our case, we needed a bank, and a lot of people do still need a bank. So we had to look for one. So finding the right bank is still complicated in Switzerland. It's better than a lot of countries, but it's still complicated. So what can we see things happening in Switzerland? So this is based on observation. Some people have different opinion. Most of the people in Switzerland who are active in crypto had at one point a bank account shut down. It happened to all of us, right? And banks have been very, very responding in a different way. But generally, the number of banks supporting crypto business is growing. Generally. And they can be back and forth, but it generally is. So, but the problem most of the bank have is that the compliance within the bank is actually picking up. They are afraid of crypto, even though Switzerland is in generally, generally the proportion of scams is actually not that big. But there's a fantasy of like the compliance people within bank are the first one to be pushed into crypto without wanting to go to crypto, right? They never ask for to understand what Bitcoin is, and they suddenly have to deal with a lot of crypto company because this is where investment and new companies are coming into. So they're forced into it, and they start to build up. And there's like this strange thing where banks are a bit at odds. So the way to handle this is to be extremely transparent, and you will see that the transparency part for the corporation itself, for your organization, is actually the key point. You have to be very transparent upfront to the bank, saying, "I'm a crypto business. I'm going to raise fund this way. You can expect this amount of money to come from there." And by playing this game always up front, you will sense if the bank is okay. And once you execute, then they will know and they will be confident, right? So this is what we did. Just a small story. We did a big fundraising with Bitty in 2016. A few millions came from the US, and we were really upfront with our bank, which means that when they had to talk to their corresponding bank in the US, the guy in the meeting says, "Oh, we saw a few dozens of millions going to your bank. What is this?" And they were like, "Okay, yeah, it's a crypto project. We know about it. All good." And the JP Morgan on the other side was like, "Okay." If the bank would have been at odds, then it would have been a nightmare for us, and we would have shut down our account. So this kind of like habit you need to have. Choose your canton right. So that's a bit more tricky because Switzerland is a very decentralized country. You know that. And every canton has its own strategy and its own culture and its own way to associate people, and the banks are part of the game. I really highly recommend whatever canton you're going to and you look at, you go and talk to the representative of the government. Most of them in all the cantons are active in and know about crypto businesses, right? Most of them. You can see on the west side of Switzerland, it's called GGBA. It's a group of like several cantons come together, and it's the business operations of those cantons. And every canton has its own representative. So in our case, we chose the canton of Neuchâtel. Harry chose the canton of Neuchâtel for several reasons, but the fact that there was a kind of coherent ecosystem where the government is aligned, is actually investing since several years into the ecosystem, and also with money, aligning with the bank, the cantonal bank who's supporting the community, and law firms, actual companies who are running in there. It creates an environment where basically once you're in the environment, you get a full support, right? So in Zug, for example, Zug was very successful in terms of the fiduciary industry, but for a long time there was no banks in Zug who were supporting, and the government was not supporting. So there was like kind of gap between the two, which is now being resolved because now more and more banks in Zug are accepting businesses in crypto. So, but I would say really it's a way to do. And then you have to because you're working with bank, you also have to work with good brokers, and the brokers will be actually a condition if you issue a token. But there's a good case to have a really good partner with a broker, because the broker knows the crypto business, and a lot of brokers are actually also have partnership with banks. So a lot of banks outsource the KYC complexity to some of the Swiss brokers. And so if you have a bank account and you're cashing out or cashing in, whatever way you go with your crypto, using a Swiss broker actually creates lots of confidence for the bank side. So that's
yeah. So I mean, I think that the one thing to remember is that, again, so there's the official rules, which the banks have to comply with, but most of the bank shutdowns, the bank account problems, because the banks have their own kind of unofficial rules, and they will often tend to try to overly comply with sometimes imaginary rules because they're worried about crypto, right? So so it's very important to find, and this is very much down to like the individual banking level. So you have to find a bank that likes crypto, ideally where you know someone like Signum, or we do a Bank Cantonal de Neuchâtel because it's a cantonal bank, so it's backed up by the canton, so that we like that because like it's not going to disappear overnight. And that, you know, if we have an issue with the bank, we can also talk not just to the bank, but to the canton. That's quite useful. I think my understanding is Tiziano is still sorting this process out. It's very much varies. It really does vary per canton. There's a lot of general defaulting to Zug. Again, I would highly discourage that. I mean, besides the fact that the Zug lawyers are mostly, in our experience, I would say gray area at best. But also, because people get a little bit confused over, like, the banks are not necessarily friendly. You may have a low personal tax rate, but if you run a company, you can determine your own income to a large extent. I mean, unless you screw up your company, right? So, so as long as the cost of doing business in a canton is whatever your income tax rate is, the income tax rates do very, very highly, but the corporate tax rates, I think the foundation tax, the nonprofit rates are quite different, but the corporate tax rates are fairly uniform throughout Switzerland. A few percentages up and down, exactly. But so you just keep this in mind when you're looking at cantons. And each canton, what we did is we talked to multiple business representatives, so a minister of economic promotion, whatever you want to call it. Each canton should have one. You should be able to email them, and they should answer you back. I mean, some cantons, like you're in Zurich or Geneva, they're not going to get you back to you because they have a lot of business. So they don't need to talk to you. In Zug, everyone's trying to use it as some sort of, to reduce their taxes. But other cantons, smaller cantons, will often have very responsive cantonal authorities, which we do think is generally a good thing. So, but they may like or dislike your business based on what you're doing and other businesses you're friends with, so forth and so on. So it's good to have like an in-person meeting between the founders of your business and the cantonal authorities. I would actually do that before incorporating in a canton in order to understand the dynamics. I would actually maybe do a few in-person meetings, develop like a hit list of 5 or 6 you want to look at, and try to be like, reasonable about it. And it's very also hard to find good brokers, right? The brokers have to be licensed. It's not trivial to get a license. So you also need to probably, if you're imagining moving lots of Bitcoin or whatever other kinds of tokens around, you should probably have a reasonably good relationship with a broker who is licensed. Otherwise, you almost certainly will encounter problems.
So here at the Plan B, actually, the representative of Neuchâtel is actually here also. You might talk to him, Nicolas Vradis. So you can look for him. He has a Taproot cap somewhere. So yeah, he's also active in connecting with the ecosystem. So our choice was mostly Neuchâtel. So the canton as a house for the canton is Neuchâtel. For the company, the Neuchâtel Cantonal Bank for the bank, the main banking. BT.com, which is a local broker also. For the private side, so when you have to store, we were successful in raising money. We had to store money somewhere. There we see that private banks are usually much more friendly. They don't have a retail approach, right? So storing money is fine. It's a job. Here we're in Geneva because Geneva has a very strong tradition. It's also French speaking, but there's a strong tradition. And most of these private banks actually have deals with brokers like BT or some others to make the KYC. So the private bank, it's actually, I think, the easy part. Don't use them as corporate account. More like, okay, we give you cash on the side, buy bonds, buy treasuries, whatever. But they're good at it, and they will really accept crypto businesses if you keep them in that role. So yeah, that's our setup. So now we go to the part where, so this is specific for issuing a token. Here, the first thing you have to know is that Switzerland, since 2018, FINMA has been issuing guidelines. So what are guidelines? Guidelines is just a wishful thinking of FINMA on how they see
you may want to explain what FINMA is to people.
So FINMA is the Swiss regulator. The Swiss regulator is a mix. It's at the same time FinCEN and SEC together. It's something like this, right? So basically, they are supervising all the banks, all the pension funds, and they're in charge of implementing anti-money laundering law and also securities law. Right. So here we go a bit in the direction of securities law because we're issuing something. Right? And FINMA has been trying to, at the beginning, now they have some problems, but until with the previous director, they were trying to keep the same law and basically put the wordings right, to put the things in the right category so we could just apply the current law. And it was actually successful, and these guidelines of ICO in 2018 were extremely successful. So they made two main things. The first thing, it says there's three categories of tokens. So there's the payment tokens. Basically, Bitcoin is a payment token, right? Something you can buy stuff with. That's a payment token. You have utility tokens, which are more things that you access a service with it. And you have asset tokens, which are the actual securities, because there's an underlying, and that means that someone is guaranteeing the value of this underlying assets, whatever it is, right? It could be equity, it could be anything else, and if you have a dividend, it's usually like this. So they said the three categories. And why these three categories? Because then the laws, the securities law applies or doesn't apply, and the AML law applies or doesn't apply. So basically, utility token, normally, if you are really a utility token, KYC does not need to apply. The law doesn't say that, right? Payment token is you might have rules like payment infrastructures, which applies, and asset tokens, securities are, well, then you have securities law that apply, right? So, and then you have to do KYC again. So based on these three things, what you have to start to think is, okay, what is my token? In which category I am? The thing is that they said also that the token, your token, can be all of it or only few of them at the same time. And they will not decide now, but whenever your token is active, they will see the reality of how the token is used, and then they will enforce there. So it's a very vague. It gives some security in terms of like the typology. It gives you an indication, but you have to be careful that the reality of your token stick to this definition. Otherwise, they might just reconsider that it could be all of three together. And
so, like, I mean, the basic rule is, regardless of what you think you're doing, the government will have some sort of opinion on it.
Yeah.
And it's very important for them to get them to write that opinion down. So if I just say I'm going to issue a security token, you don't talk to FINMA about it, they may have a different opinion about it than you. So you want to begin, I mean, it used to be kind of loosey-goosey in this space, with like Ethereum, so forth and so on. Now it's much, it's a bit tightening up, and so it's better to begin communicating with FINMA before you actually like issue your asset. And they don't really like care where you issue your asset. You can say, I issue my asset as a confidential asset on Liquid. I issue my asset on Ethereum. I issue my asset in RGB. These details are generally not something that they care about. But what they do care about is, like, what the asset actually is. They're not stupid. They know what tokenization is. They know what Bitcoin and how they generally know how cryptocurrency kind of works. So you just have to begin this process as soon as possible, and they will kind of issue you an opinion letter, which we'll go into later.
Yeah. Okay. So, and the other point that they say, if you're issuing a token, they say partner with a Swiss broker. Because normally, if you are issuing a token, you would have to do the KYC, and you would have to register yourself as a financial intermediary. And
they a lot of licenses, very expensive.
Yeah, and they recognize that if just for one thing you're just issuing a token once, it's a bit stupid to be regulated financial intermediary just for this one event. So they said, okay, you can outsource this to a Swiss via VASP crypto broker, and then they have two obligations via this crypto broker. One, they have to do the KYC on the people, obviously, and do the AML. The second, the money has to actually go through them. fiat or crypto, doesn't matter, but the investors will actually pay to the crypto, to the VASP, and then the money will come to you, whatever it is, crypto. So that's why the choosing a right VASP is important from the start. Okay, so the other thing that happened, this is a kind of very simple timeline that most of the projects want to achieve. Basically, you have first you do private pre-sales, okay, and this is the moment where you get the big investors in, the first rounds, and at one point you have your thing is ready, and then you do a public sale. Public sale is usually one event. And then once the sale is public, then you go, your token, it gets liquid, and you create a secondary market. And so what the Swiss authorities said is that indeed, once your token is running and is active and is doing what it is supposed to do, well, it might be a utility token, a payment token, or a security. Doesn't matter. Okay, but before it is active, it's always a security. Right. So if you are starting, if you're like making pre-sales and SAFTs and whatever kind of contracts where you're offering someone to give you money for a token that will be issued in a couple of months or years, it is a security, right? So in reality, for example, if you look at what Ethereum did, Ethereum people gave Bitcoins, and it took 2 years for Ethereum to issue the Ethereum tokens. It was a security on the Swiss way. Yes?
Yeah, one question, I think that's true, but so always if you have a claim against the issuer, it's kind of deemed a security by FINMA, but if the token doesn't yet exist, so it's kind of not yet a claim because it doesn't yet exist. So if you do a SAFT and you just say, listen, at the time of the issuance, you will have kind of a right to buy it, is it then, in my view, it's another security? Yeah. So because there is no claim, because you do not have at this point in time, it's not yet existing, this token. So I think this is kind of a gray area. And I know FINMA said that, or unofficially says that if it's a claim at the time you buy a token, it's not yet existing, then it's a claim, and then it's a security token. But I'm not fully. I do not agree that if you have only a SAFT in place, or like it will be at the future time an issuance, then this should not be deemed a security.
Yeah, well, so the thing is that when we designed this, also we took into consideration not just Switzerland but also outside, basically the oversight. I mean, the oversight you have to put before the public sale is you get a lot of security in terms of like securing your own company and your project by applying the security rules, right? So that means that it's an audited company. That means that you have that also, and we'll come to that. You'll have a prospectus.
We only have 5 more minutes, so maybe we should speed up real quick. Yeah. But what I would say is, like, in general, like how this actually plays out on the ground is you have to KYC AML your investors, or your VASP does, and so. In general, unless you really have a good reason not to do that, it's generally a good thing to do that. I can't imagine a reason where it's not a situation where it's not a good thing to do, and that provides you less legal risk. So you could make this kind of high risk argument, like, oh guys, maybe it's some other, it's not a security, it's like a magical third thing. But like you'd have to get FINMA to accept that. You might have to take FINMA to court. Like it kind of jeopardizes. Like it depends like how much risk as a business owner you want to take. So we recommend taking minimal risk, which and how that practically rolls out is pretty harsh KYC AML requirements on the initial set of investors.
So just to come up is that actually when we launched the mainnet and we actually start giving the tokens to the investors, that was previously the public sale. So the public sale, so the network was already existing. So that's why we considered the system as the token as a security, because we had the private sale, we gave the token to the public investors, so they had something already, and then we did the public sale.
Let's finish the prospectus stuff. I think we got to get out here in a sec.
So the compliance side, basically there's 2 main things that you want to look at. The first one is It's a form of kind of Swiss bribery corruption system, because this is something that doesn't exist in law. FINMA never was supposed to ask these letters, but they said it was a good idea because you have to pay for them, right? So the FINMA no action letter is basically you prepare your thoughts about what is the qualification. You submit this to the FINMA, and FINMA will say, yeah, we agree, or we don't agree. Actually, sometimes they say they don't agree, but if it's well done and if you have a good lawyer and you're well described, then they will usually agree. The main usage of this paper is that then you can go to all the financial service provider that you're using, your bank, your lawyer, your broker, and there's a common understanding because the language which is written there, everyone understands. And then everyone says, oh, you're a utility token and you do this and that. Okay, and we're all aligned. So that's the main usage of this letter.
And the thing you're tokenizing will have a big effect, right? So you're going to make a very different argument. Let's say I'm tokenizing gold, like what Tether's up to. That's going to be a very different kind of discussion with FINMA. I'm tokenizing real estate, then I'm tokenizing I don't know what. Like these letters tend to be very specific, so you need a good lawyer, you need to be patient with FINMA. It used to be that people would issue their thing first and talk to FINMA later. This obviously is not the ideal situation because they may not like what you're doing. So the general recommendation is just build. And these letters, like they can take between, my experience, 3 months and a year, right?
Yeah,
Depending
no,
on the
more 3 months than
more
a year.
3 months, but it
Yeah,
depends,
3
you know.
months,
So
yeah.
you should bake this process into
Earlier,
whatever you're doing
yeah.
earlier rather than later.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing is that we wanted to do a public sale. So, organizing a public sale in Switzerland is a bit hard. So we went through a coin list, which had a much more big crowd to get interested into the public sale. But what we did is we did a prospectus. The prospectus is actually a condition of the securities law, and then here. One thing you have to understand is as soon as you are marketing your token to more than 500 people, and just open it up, just making it a website or making an ad is enough, right? It's not. Then basically, if you're looking to sell it to more than 500 people, you have to make what is called a prospectus. What is a prospectus? It's a document which is very formal. The law says exactly what needs to be in there, and it actually just describes your own project. So if you're clean, if you know where if your books are in order, basically you have to say who's the owner, who's the where you incorporated, what are the rules, and so on, and how the token is being issued, and so on. So it's a very formal process. And we did the first prospectus in Switzerland for a token. And so what is interesting also is because the way Switzerland works, well, they actually, even though it was a utility token that we described, because we were making partially a pre-sale and everything, the most adapted system was the debt security token, which allows us to also have an ISIN number afterwards, and also in the terms of the US was able to deem ourselves as foreign registered security instead of foreign unregistered security, like Harry said
so
before.
again, we go to the next slide. What you don't want to be, you don't want to be an unregistered security. Okay? This is very bad, right? So this is what leads to the SEC actions. Like the reason is also there's some common sense, which is like, what is, I mean, it's a kind of metaphysical question. What makes a shitcoin? The danger of alternative coins or tokenization techniques is that you may not know what's behind it. So someone gives me Tether gold, is there really gold behind it? Someone gives me this thing, is what's really behind it? Who's issuing it? How many are there? How many BNB are there? No one knows. It's very confusing, right? So the prospectus exists for very good reason, to reduce the amount of asymmetry between the issuer and the buyer, right? So there is a legitimate anger at crypto. I mean, with Bitcoin, it's a bit more mysterious because Nakamoto has disappeared, and we know kind of 21 million, blah blah blah. But this is not necessarily the case for like stable coins. Not necessarily the case for tokenized assets in general. Not necessarily even the case for security tokens. If like they can't, like you should really do this because it does reduce. It's good for the company or your entity. It reduces asymmetry between the issuer and consumer. Legally gives you some more sure footing. So it's kind of good for you, good for the consumer, and also gives you clear international status. So with clear international status, you can get things which are needed if you want to access certain regulated secondary markets. So the way you want to think about it is things like Binance are unregulated secondary markets. Who knows what's going on? A lot of the reason why FTX was just a disaster was it was a unregulated secondary markets. They could just whatever, negative trading, who cares, right? So there are regulated markets. We are familiar with many of these. So for example, SIX is the National Swiss Exchange. It's a regulated market. Arnab over here has a Luxembourg regulated market called Stalker. Bitfinex has something, I don't know the details, Digital, which is essentially the merged exchange in Seychelles, Fusang in Hong Kong, they run on Liquid with Blockstream. So there are regulated secondary markets. You typically would need a prospectus to access a regulated secondary market. And they're not, people think it's like impossible to get. Now this is because historically, people think of this very US-centric way. So they say, oh, I need, it's basically like an IPO. But an IPO is, push comes to shove, a $6 million process. So small companies can't typically do IPOs. It's like this, it's almost impossible. However, in Switzerland, it is actually possible to get a prospectus. You have your lawyer write it, you make sure it's not incorrect, SIX will approve it, which is the national exchange, or another exchange like BX Swiss. They have bodies which approve prospectuses, and that gives you access, international notification. You can harmonize between different capital markets. Now, to be very frank, there's not much liquidity in these markets right now for tokenized assets, but there might be in the future. It also makes it more clear what, for example, you have an asset, you need a market maker. So what we recommend, market makers, they exist for equities, they exist for everything, right? So market makers exist to basically prevent volatility to destroy the asset class, right? So you give them something like a loan or you pay them and they make sure the asset class has smooth trading on public markets. And these should ideally be regulated as well. Now the problem, why did Alameda go so wrong? Because there was not regulations in place for crypto token market making on FTX. It was all very incestuous. However, there are regulated securities and even crypto token market makers. For example, flow traders, which we use. They do traditional equities. They will do tokenized equities, so forth and so on. There are other firms as well. It's a kind of somewhat difficult space to navigate. And coverage for tokenized assets can be a bit limited. But we do recommend that if you do you should do a prospectus. Almost everyone forgets to do a prospectus, and it makes everyone look bad. Yeah. And the second reason, and they're not so hard to do. Like maybe you're going to spend extra few thousand on it, maybe 30,000 max or something. And the second thing is then then this helps like the whole market congeal. So you can't imagine like tokenized security markets functioning, but they won't function unless you kind of do the paperwork properly. And a lot of people, they move too quick, they don't do the paperwork, and then it's very hard to go back, because you can't like go back in time and be like, oh, I issued, I don't know, Tether water because there's a water crisis due to climate change, and people are like, what is that? And you can't go back in time. You should do the steps beforehand. Okay.
So I'm going to, we're running out of time, so just can finish the last slides. The last part is the accounting in Bitcoin. Why? Because it's if you have audited, you have to be regular. You have to get your accounting correct. There are a few tips. It's something that is being built now. You need to get your accountants in multi-sigs. It's a very interesting exercise that we're doing with the help of a lot of the local community. The software needs to be right also. There's few crypto software, accounting software that exists, but in reality right now our aim was more to use a traditional Web 2 but open source software that we can change and we can add. So we use Odoo, and we're going to publish very soon, a couple of weeks, the plugins for Bitcoin, Ether and Cosmos. And our auditors also getting up to speed. This is still where you need to train them. You need to have a lot of discussion with them because they need to understand what an expert key is. You give them Electrum so they can see. They play along the game. And very important, when you are the issuer of your token, normally all the tokens you have, if you have Bitcoin, Ether, whatever, these are just assets that you have in your company, like fiat, right? But if you're the issuer of the token, then you have to create, and your auditors will ask you this, you have to create an inventory of it. It's like a product, and you have to price the issuing cost. So you would usually look at how much money you burned already until the moment you issue the token, and you divide by the number of token, and that will be the cost, the production cost of your token. But you have this accounting trick that you need to do. And finally, just some pro tips for Switzerland. Swiss people love meeting people. So it's when you do business in a canton, it's small places. Go and meet the people of the government. Actually, like shake hands, sign documents with blue ink. They love that, right? And it creates a lot of trust. Transparency. Really match your words with what you want to do, because then you actually have things moving on the right direction. Create jobs locally, even one. So basically, if you're like a foreign entity, or a foreign group of people, you want to go into Switzerland because you think it's the only place where you have a place to go. Actually move one of the founders here. Otherwise, you can have like some dodgy Zug lawyer that will take over your company and your funds. It happens. So actually move here and be in control. That's really important. And use local services. Like I told you, talk to the canton and get to know the map of the local services, but be critical, put them in competition, keep your independence on them. It's important. And these are like, I think, tips. But the create job the tip is really important. The banks usually will ask you for this one. And thank you.
So over time, but we're happy to answer questions informally afterwards. If you're interested in multi-sigs, Darko over there in the corner of the field with the beard runs a multi-sig, Polto and Darko run a multi-sig company.
You have Ross from Bitty here.
Provides,
the broker.
Yeah, we have Bitty folks here who are a broker.
And we have Olga from MyCitadel, working on MyCitadel, which is also one of the software we're using for the multi-sig.
Yeah, and then like for Lugano, there's a fellow called Piero who's walking around. He can explain to you the benefits and pluses and minuses of Lugano. I mean, again, in general, like I'd recommend always shopping around a bit. But it's sometimes hard to find these people, so going to a local conference is generally a pretty good thing to do. And I think that the general rule we've learned here is that you can act like Switzerland, unlike many other countries, like they're not very clear on crypto, and it's a dangerous business risk to be in a jurisdiction where there's not clear rules. Now, Switzerland, the rules are clear. There's always some local negotiation, which is sometimes can be useful. But there's no rules. So we do recommend you follow the rules, you follow them as strictly as you can, and this makes your organization more transparent. And by virtue of making your organization more transparent, you establish better trust with your customers, your users, open source coders, and this will be more likely to lead to a successful technical project. And this is true even, like, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If it's like a Bitcoin open source project, you're issuing tokenized water, whatever, you should generally be aware of all of these issues. Okay.
Yeah. So thank you very much.